Okay, well, thank you all for coming to the special screening of Tony's film, Mr. Malcolm's List. And I think the cinematography, if you don't mind me saying, Mr. Miller is rather handsome. I think everyone will agree with that. Could you talk a little bit about how the film got greenlit and what was the background to it, given the COVID situation when you first started shooting?
I think the sense was that Universal wanted a feel-good film. They wanted something that was utterly escapist, and at the same time, there was a racist atrocity going on almost every week in America. And I think that they felt that this was all good medicine, particularly, we've got to remember, this was the really darkest days of COVID. And so they greenlit it very quickly, and they were very concerned about the casting. They wanted it to be, I better praise C tonight and say I will do my best with language, because I want to talk about skin tones, but please excuse me if my language isn't at all times 100% correct. I have my daughter Hannah who gives me lessons regularly on how to behave, but they wanted it to be colourblind casting. Well, I think a better term is inclusive, and they wanted us to forget that you could go to this period Georgian film, which was a film of wit, very much a Jane Austen-esque remake of Pride and Prejudice. And the idea was that you just had a good time. So we were armed very much with that and given very, very strict guidelines in a way by Universal. And I think the film started with a much bigger budget, but COVID took a real big whack out of it. We were shut down a couple of times. So.
Can you just, going on to the actual lighting, which is what we're here for, just talk about you talked about inclusivity in the cast. You have many different skin tones. How did you approach that?
Well, I think there was much concern from Emma, the director, from lots of different sources that, skin tones hadn't always diversely been very well cared for. And I use care in the sense that they weren't always very well lit. Makeup wasn't always brilliant, and everything seemed to be designed, even from the light meter for white skin tones. And so here there was quite a challenge in a sense that, there was a huge variety from Chope, our star, who had a very, very dark skin tone, to sort of alabaster, Irish, very pasty white skin tones. And I think that what I did in the beginning was to do what I do on many projects, which is to do makeup and lighting tests and shoot the artists on lots of different lenses to get to know the architecture of their faces, and then really think about here what the difference was in terms of exposure between one and the other. And we mapped that. And then maybe more interestingly, we looked at how the various different coloured skin tones reflected light. And because this was profoundly candle lit, it was trying to see, if Zowie, for instance, would come out very, very saturated very quickly. And so we decided in the end that Chope was 2,200 Kelvin, which is a colour temperature, and then Zowie was about 2,400. And we mapped this, and then with my gaffer, we had a shorthand which really helped us in production. But I think the other thing is I often wanted to be able to light it as dark as I like lighting dark, and although this had to be lighter because it was a romantic comedy, I wanted to be able to go, dark in places with the artists. And Chope, for instance, when he moves, because in a way darkness harbours really interesting emotional aspects, and I think when he moves in and out of the light, there were times we wanted him to be on the edge where you couldn't quite see him. So knowing that, having planned it in prep, certainly helped along the way.
We talked personally before about your other work and how that informed what you did in this on this project. You talked about what you learned shooting Fleabag, for instance, which is obviously is a different kind of show, but it has a comedy, dark comedy element to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, Fleabag, I went in thinking I'm not going to learn anything from this. They want the guy who likes period drama, which was why I got employed. But I learned so much, and in a way, when Fleabag broke the fourth wall and looked straight at the camera, somehow she implicated us, all of us, in that drama. And for a moment, we became part of her bad behaviour, and we related to it. And so, in a way, this was how you reveal yourself to the camera. And I learned a lot that, watching actors and how they reveal themselves, how do they reveal this moment to the camera that nobody else sees, but we as the audience see, because that's very impactful. And so with these actors, I went and watched rehearsals a lot to try and understand those moments where they're vulnerable and where they really, really reveal themselves. Because once you understand it physically, then you can light around it, and then you can start to, create a drama off the screen, or all the other things us cinematographers try to do. And so with these artists, it was really brilliant to, pick that up from Fleabag, and it's definitely something that seems utterly obvious, or maybe it wasn't obvious to me.
But you also, not just different skin tones, you had different ages as well of actors to light in the most diplomatic way possible. Could you explain what the issues are for the cinematographer there, especially in ensemble pieces?
I think with Chope, we wanted him to be a beautiful leading man, like a leading lady from the 1950s in some ways. But these guys, they were all supposed to be in their 20s. They were all supposed to be debutantes, or a couple of years out of that, and they were in their late 30s. And so I did quite a lot of work to try and make them as beautiful as I could. And I lit softly, I used softer lenses, I diffused, I had, I think I've got one stocking left of my number 10 Dernier silk stockings that we put on the back of the lenses. And then we did some beauty work with Tom at Dirty Looks, under eyes, to try and help in a few places. But I don't know, in the end I think it kind of works that they're in their 30s. And I think the thing about period is that I'll talk about this maybe on one of the other questions, but you invent your own period, and in a way, maybe, we've all got a Mr. Malcolm's List, and we've all got, in our 30s, questions about relationships that they didn't have in Jane Austen's era.
Mm. So I'm going to skip to a related subject of the type of light that you were using, because you mentioned in our discussion that you were using mainly tungsten lighting, and you went against trend for LED lighting at the moment, and because of the amount of candle lighting, and relating that to how you were lighting the faces as well. I mean, what advantage does using tungsten give you think, or is it just
I don't know, I've still got a bit of a fossil fuel habit, not maybe quite as bad as Tarek, who I know is here, but I like lighting with tungsten. I find it has a beautiful quality of light. And I do use LEDs, but I think a lot of the big sources through the windows were tungsten, and I just can't replicate them. And I find that much as I wish I could use more LED, that I still light a lot. And I think part of it is that the light drops off so beautifully with tungsten, and it lets me have a less cluttered set. I tend to use really big Dinos and 24Ks and Wendy lights, and then reefer lights I still use. We had to ship a lot of them in. Panavision Panelux couldn't understand what the hell we wanted them for, but I still use them a lot. And I just think they give us a better quality of light. And I use LEDs in the background, or if I'm rigging a stage, I'll use LEDs, of course, because why wouldn't you? But it just comes down to this quality of light that LED just still can't quite replicate. I think particularly for, period. I mean, I've just done a modern day HBO miniseries and I lit most of that LED. But I still found with that when I put a 20K up or a big tungsten source, it somehow looks nicer.
I mean, especially as there's a lot of candle lighting in that, and obviously you feel that the tungsten light, can sort of augment that better than LED lighting.
I think it does. I mean, it makes you think as well, because you've got to decide on the colour temperature. You can't just switch it all and go through automatically. So you, in a sense, have to plan it more. And I mean, after this, I went and did a Elizabethan drama, and I lit a lot of that with just plain candlelight. And I lit quite a lot of this. I had big banks of candles in a sort of semi-rounded cove with reflective silver behind them, and we'd have about 40 candles in there. And very bad to breathe in, especially, thank God we all had masks on. But, and I'd place those very close to people's faces, and then just use a little bit of a reefer light. But no, quite a lot is actually lit just with candles, with a bit of augmentation of tungsten.
For your references, visual references, I know, we all tend to look at paintings, photographs, or what have you, before we start a project. So, could you just explain a little bit about why cinematographers tend to look at art a lot? I know it sounds obvious question, but especially for period films, and how does it relate to this particular film? What were your influences on this particular?
I think you start one of these projects with a very broad net, and you sort of come at it thinking, well, what references should I pull in, and what actually will be really pertinent and relevant. And I think for this, there was a sense that, you create your own sense of period, and consequently, you wanted to have a semblance. It needs to be authentically Georgian. They didn't want a Bridgerton concept, but I think you can pull in modern and old references from all different aspects. I mean, I grew up in Holland. I was dragged around galleries, forced to look at Vermeer's, Rembrandt's, Peter de Hoof, till I was bored out of my brain and part of my dysfunctional childhood. But one thing that I loved was thinking about Peter de Hoof, who was a big influence on this, who was a very domestic Dutch painter who would photograph interior, exteriors. There's a humour to it, and also in a way he photographed a very new middle class, and at that time in the Golden Age, the middle class were getting portraits done, and much of that was relevant. There was also pastoralism. We talked a lot that we wanted to really celebrate pastoralism in this, and Constable was a big reference for that. Other references were Rembrandt, who always cheats with candlelight. you think it's one source, but actually he wraps it around people's faces, and he, creates a story off the canvas, and you look at these decisive moments and you learn a lot, and you realize, well, I can cheat. I don't just need one light source. I can actually just cheat it round and be a more emotionally relevant. Another great fun that we had on this project was that we wanted a symmetry to it, and so we looked a lot at Titian, David, Poussin and Caravaggio about how symmetrical their frames were. And Alexandra Brambillo, our brilliant Italian operator, had a grid often on the lens, where he would very, very carefully try and create a sort of tableau frame. And we stole lots of those from old paintings. Another big influence in terms of symmetry and composition was David Fincher, who tends to create very static frames where things happen within the frame. So a big variety of people. Another one was Atkinson Grimshaw, who is a sort of Victorian painter who mixes warm and cold light. And again, he quite romanticizes the images. And I stole from him the sense of trying to mix blue and warm firelight quite often.
You were going to, I believe, shoot this on film originally, anamorphic film. I'm quite intrigued as to how you would have, your approach, how it would have been different. Can you just talk a bit about if you did you do tests with the anamorphic format as well?
Yeah, we shot anamorphic tests, and we decided it was going to be a film project shot in anamorphic. We did lots of tests. We were firmly signed up to do that, and then just before we went into principal photography, COVID was in its dark days, and hampered also by Brexit, getting the rushes to London to the lab, and turnaround meant that we couldn't be insured because no one could guarantee that we could get the rushes to the lab within 2 days. And so that made it just impossible to insure, and the production bond said you can't shoot film. So literally, I think it was about 3 weeks before we started shooting that we had to switch. And I went to the LF, the ARRI LF full frame. I rapidly tested various different lenses. I looked at the ARRI signatures. I compared them against the new Lights full frame primes. And I must just say that despite Lights sponsoring this, I'm telling you what I honestly believe about them, but they just shone out as the most amazing lenses. And I think that I've been through my vintage lens period. I've used lots of vintage lenses. I used to own the Vintage Lens Company, and I've found that I just got bored with them, getting a call from the cutting room saying, oh, there's distortion on the 32, or feeling that they didn't color match, and that I wanted a set of lenses that were really sharp across the plane. And these lights just had this incredible warmth and beauty to them. But as I'm sure all of you know, Leica aren't cheap. And I tried to rent a set, and I couldn't rent a set in London. The only person who had a set was Seamus McGarvey, who just bought them. So I had to decide, well, I'm going to have to buy a set. So I pulled my kids out of private schools, went to the Priory and pulled my wife, Jojo is here tonight, out of rehab, Quaaludes and Baby Sham habit, and I bought the lenses, for which you could buy a garden flat in Hampstead, or probably 2 or 3 Lamborghinis. So Leicas are extortionately expensive, but they're incredibly good. And I've been just blown away by them. I've just done an HBO modern day project and let them flare and push them to the limit, and I'm just really, they are beautiful to behold, and they do beautiful things with skin tones, and I'm sure you've worked with them, Pete. They're quite something.
Yeah. I mean, do you think it gives you more control as a cinematographer, having a modern lens look like that? I mean, you can predict everything with those lenses, as opposed to like a vintage lens. As you say, you know, the effects can be random and gratuitous, and they're burnt into the, you know, the image that then in post is, you know, I know you don't have a lot of visual effects in this, but...
Well, I think visual effects are so important to every project now. And, you know, when I did Carnival Row, you know, we decided to shoot that on master primes because they're such good lenses and they're so well matched. And for visual effects in a big show like Carnival Row, you need that. But I'm rather fond of these for period too. And I think the fact they do match, I know, you know, I do so much more in post these days than I would have previously ever done. And I know if I want to distort the edges, I can do that. And I'm very in love with full frame. I just think that it gives me the depth of field of anamorphic, and yet I've got 12 or 13 lenses to play with, and I feel I have more flavors with it. So.
Just before you mentioned the operator you worked with, Alessandro Brambilla, Alex Brambilla from Rome, who we all know is a brilliant camera and Steadicam operator. And you know, could you just talk a little bit more about, because obviously, you know, you mentioned composition, and you've obviously mentioned your painting references, and, you know, in conversations with your operator, how did that work? You know,
well, I think it started by, first of all, Pete turned me down. I asked him to do the film. Pete said no. I got the feeling he didn't want to work with me, and he went off to work with Seamus. Anyway, we've been through that. So I got Alex, who is the most brilliant operator from Rome, and I've worked with Alex 3 times, and he, like you, Pete, he's a world-class operator. He's also at that zen point with Steadicam where, you know, there's only a few of you who can do it, who just make it effortless. And Alex is a bear of a man. He's huge, and he's an artist.
He costs more than I do at catering. That's the problem.
And we had great fun. I think, you know, I've realised a few films back that, coming from documentary and the European way, you know, I'm used to always having held on tightly to operate. But with the exception of handheld, I'm much better with an operator. And, you know, Alex is a perfect person for that. And he was very good, because on all these films we have to do so much politics. It takes up a lot of our time. And Alex was brilliant to have someone there who, you know, you've talked through what you want to do in terms of composition, in terms of symmetry, in terms of, you know, the intent of the film. And then they're like a choreographer, you know, they work the movement out and move the frame and alter the props and do all the other things that really, really help. So it was a great collaboration, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. He apologises he can't be here tonight, but he's in Rome, I think, struggling with Robert Richardson. So.
Oh, God, I'm thinking of him. I thought some of the intimate moments where he's obviously moving around the actors, where you feel a special connection with the actors, was some of the best work.